Strange but true stories, tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Did you know that before he became President of the United States, Jimmy Carter filed a report that he had seen an unidentified flying object? It's true. September 18, 1973, Carter filed an official report with the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena of a sighting he had 4 years earlier in 1969. Carter described waiting for a Lions Club meeting in Leary, Georgia to begin. It was about 7:30 p.m. when he spotted what he called the darndest thing I've ever seen in the sky. Carter, as well as 10 to 12 other people, witnessed the same event, describing the object as very bright with changing colors and about the size of the moon. Carter reported that the object hovered about 30 degrees above the horizon and moved in toward the Earth and away before disappearing into the distance. He later told a reporter that after the experience, he vowed never again to ridicule anyone who claimed to have seen a UFO. While Carter's story was from a distance, today's SBT takes us a bit further south, and an experience with a UFO that was way too close for comfort. The night air was hot and humid, which was typical of an August night in the South Florida Everglades. It was August 19, 1952, and Scoutmaster Sonny DeVerges was driving a car full of scouts back home after a fun and successful campout. Cruising down State Road 809, better known in Florida as the Military Trail, DeVerges had his mind on the previous 24 hours, hopeful that he had made a positive impact on the boys in his troop, providing them with happy memories of time well spent under the seemingly limitless night sky. Little did he know that in a few moments, an indelible memory would be etched in all of their minds. Up ahead, Sonny could see the lights on in a farmhouse. To either side of the highway were thick palmetto groves. The mundane life of the 30-year-old hardware store clerk was about to get very exciting. A flash of light in front of him and a crash off to his right caused DeVerges to pull off onto the shoulder of the road. His first thought was that it had been a small plane crashing into the grove. He grabbed a flashlight and a machete to cut through the darkness and the thickness of the undergrowth to investigate the crash and provide some assistance, if possible. He told his scouts to stay put, and if he didn't return in 15 minutes, run to the nearby farmhouse and call the police. He stepped away from the car and toward the thicket, not knowing what awaited him on the other side. 5 minutes of swinging the machete, hacking away at the grove, DeVerges entered a small clearing. It was then that he noticed a strange smell. He described it later as an acute, nauseating smell. He focused as best as he could, trying not to vomit. Then came the sensation of somebody or something watching him, an eerie feeling of eyes upon him, observing from a distance. And then came the heat. A feeling of an incredible oven-like warmth washed over him as he looked up to observe a circular object hovering above him, blotting out the night sky. It was a dull black, and he couldn't see any seams or rivets. He estimated it to be 30 feet in diameter and 10 feet in height. On top of the ship, he described a convex dome, and around the edge was a phosphorescent glow. He stepped back slowly, edging his way back towards his car, but keeping a steady eye on the object he could not identify, trying to take it all in. Then he heard a sound similar to metal scraping metal, possibly a hatch opening, he wondered. At that point, a red light shot forth from the side of the vessel and moved toward him. Sonny placed his hands, now balled into fists, over his face to shield his eyes from the bright light. Peeking through, he noticed what seemed to be a red mist engulfing him. Then, he lost consciousness. 3 scouts, David Rowan, Chuck Stevens, and Bobby Ruffing, had done exactly as DeVerges had instructed. They waited in the car as their scoutmaster went to investigate. Ruffing recounted his story later, saying he saw a bright semicircle of white lights descending and then red light emanating from the brush. Rowan and Stevens echoed that as well, saying in addition that they had seen the light from DeVurgis's flashlight swirling around and upward through the trees before it suddenly went dark. That's when they climbed out of the car and sprinted for the farmhouse. The farmer inside met the scared preteens on his front porch, listened to their strange story, let them inside, and then called up the Palm Beach Sheriff's Department. Sheriff's Deputy Mott Parton and Lake Worth Constable Lewis Carroll responded to the call. Nearly an hour after the initial sighting, the boys returned to the car with the farmer and the officers. DeVurgis, having regained consciousness, stumbled out of the palmetto grove, waving the machete and mumbling incoherent words. The deputy made a note later saying, "In all my 19 years of law enforcement work, I've never seen anyone as terrified as he was." DeVurgis said he awoke leaning against a tree, but that he couldn't see well at all. His eyes burned as he scrambled back towards the highway. Slowly, after a few minutes, his eyesight began to return to normal as he continued to tell the officers about his encounter. DeVurgis and the boys were taken to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, where they were questioned more about the incident. Officers made a note of the hair on DeVurgis's forearms being singed and his skin showing indications of being burned. They also noted 3 tiny burn holes in the bill of the Scoutmaster's cap. They later found his flashlight in the grove. It appeared to have been burned in a hot fire. After wrapping up the interviews with the 4, they contacted relevant agencies about the happenings on State Road 809. That eventually made its way to Project Blue Book chief at the time, Captain Edward J. Ruppelt. Ruppelt would later classify the incident as one of the weirdest UFO reports that I came up against. This was a busy time for UFO investigators. 1952 was a banner year for UFO sightings. Commercial and military pilots, airport control tower operators, priests, police officers, government officials, and many others filed credible reports of UFOs. The flying saucer reference was used by most, and they had been spotted both visually and by radar near military bases, nuclear sites, Washington, D.C., and all over the country. The Cold War was simmering, and the threat of nuclear war loomed large around the world. Seth Shostak, lead astronomer at the SETI Institute, believes there was definitely a Cold War influence on UFO reports during this time, saying, "I think that the Cold War is probably responsible for a lot of our attitudes toward UFOs, because after the Second World War, we were worried, of course, about bombers from the Soviet Union, so watching the skies was an act of survival. Everybody was worried about this threat from above, and I think that did influence our thoughts about unknown objects." Between 1952 and 1969, the U.S. Air Force conducted investigations under the banner of Project Blue Book, analyzing incidents and evidence of UFO-related encounters to determine if there was a risk to national security. There was also the thought that the Air Force was quelling UFO hysteria to calm the nerves of the nation. Just a few months prior to the Palm Beach incident, the April 7th edition of Life magazine, with Marilyn Monroe on the cover, published a story titled, "Have We Visitors from Space?" It was a reflection of what was going on in the country at that time. A few days after DeVurgis's sighting, Ruppelt, age 29 at the time, brought a team of Air Force UFO investigators to the West Palm Beach area to conduct an investigation. They interviewed DeVurgis and the 3 boys separately. Investigators made a note of DeVurgis's injuries that likened the burn to flash radiation exposure. There were singed hairs, burns on his face and arms, and they also pointed out that his nostrils showed signs of being burned as if by a flash heat source. The holes in his hat were described as being made by a sparking electrical source. Ruppelt described DeVurgis as likable, willing to cooperate, and displaying the immediate impression he was telling the truth. Then they investigated the site of the encounter. Ruppelt and his team discovered circular scorch marks in the grass where the attack supposedly took place. The grass had been singed. They collected grass and soil samples. Those samples were sent to Battelle Memorial Institute for analysis, and what the agronomists at the lab found was quite compelling. The scientists noticed the root structures of the plants were charred. The lower leaves were subjected to high heat, In attempting to duplicate the effect, the technicians at Battelle had to crank the heat up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit to come close to mimicking what they were seeing from the samples taken from the West Palm Beach UFO site. Jeffrey Wilson, co-founder of the Independent Crop Circle Researchers Association, noted that the unusual part of the sample results was the analysis of the high heat transferred below the surface. It was the first and only time he studied samples with below-surface heating of this magnitude. A few days after repeated questioning of the Scoutmaster and the boys and numerous trips to the site, 3 more witnesses came forward. A 7-year-old boy was in his backyard when he saw a set of lights land on the back of their property in a 5-acre area of palmetto scrub brush on Military Trail north of Okeechobee Boulevard. He ran to get his father and a friend of his dad's to take a look. The father grabbed his camera and took several pictures. The boy distinctly remembered he saw the craft land in front of a melaleuca tree. All 3 of them saw the lights and the ship. When they were interviewed, the Air Force confiscated the photos and warned them to keep quiet. Those pictures and corresponding negatives have not been seen since. But when Captain Edward Ruppelt wrote his report, he came to the conclusion that the whole incident was a hoax, labeling it the best hoax in UFO history. He noted that he didn't believe the 3 preteen boys could have seen strange lights or their scoutmaster through the thicket of palmetto scrub that night. Next, investigating deeper into Divergis, he discovered he had been dishonorably discharged from the Marines after he was found guilty of stealing a car. His neighbors also described Divergis as somebody who liked to embellish his stories and tell tall tales. Ruppelt determined he was a media-hungry con man and an opportunist. Divergis did eventually sell his story to the American Weekly newspaper in 1953. But while the investigator assassinated the Scoutmaster's character and came up with what he thought was a plausible explanation of what happened that night, the official designation on the Project Blue Book investigation of the events on August 19, 1952 is still listed as unsolved. Years later, in 1997, Ron Wiggins, a reporter with the Palm Beach Post, tracked down 2 of the scouts who were with Divergis that night. They told the same story to Wiggins that they told Air Force investigators 45 years earlier. He didn't have the opportunity to interview Divergis. He had died at the age of 70 in Apopka, Florida in 1993. Jeffrey Wilson, the Crop Circle investigator who looked into this case independently, said, "Something unusual happened to Divergis that night, and the physical evidence backed him up. Why would you go to the trouble of faking something like this? Why and how would he stage that? It doesn't make any sense." This has been another strange but true story. So time to tell us what you think. Did the Scoutmaster, his 3 scouts, and the family nearby who had their pictures confiscated see an alien spacecraft that night? Was Sonny Divergis attacked by aliens? Or was he just a hype man looking for publicity, as the Air Force investigators characterized him? Let us know in the comments below. If you have had a strange, unexplainable event occur to you and you'd like to share it with us, we'd love to read it. Send your story to us in full Technicolor detail in an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Give us a like if you feel so inclined. Subscribe to the channel and sign up for notifications too, so you know when the next video drops to the channel. We know these have been a bit sporadic in the past few months. You never know when that next video will land. Thanks for your patience and your support. It is greatly appreciated. And thanks for watching this video. I'm Steve White. Until next time.